Welcome to our conversation. We start a series of videos today where we look at mental illness in the church. It's been said that there are 3 hidden struggles in the church: abuse, addiction, and mental illness. And today we bring light to that last conversation. So Joshua, tell me about this past year.
Well, about a year ago, I was serving full-time as a pastor at Sunnyside Mennonite Church, and also working through some medication issues of my own, because I have a major depressive disorder, and so this is something that was being maintained in my life, but I wasn't responding well anymore to a particular medication and needed to make some changes that began to a snowball of other changes into how ministry became less and less manageable for me. And so I needed to request some time off, and suddenly, as you know, what was managed and in the background or on the back burner in my life became a front burner issue, and then everything else goes to the back. And so I had to prioritize communication with our church board, and of course trying to walk through this process with integrity. And in light of so much confusion, there were so many factors that affected how that process unfolded, and eventually that led towards this past summer me being released from my position as the lead pastor there. And so now we're in a time of discerning, and I also had to go through some treatment this past summer to address changes that needed to happen in managing my mental health.
And in view of that overarching story, I want to hear what it was like for you personally, kind of in that in-between time.
Sure. This was devastating. I absolutely loved Sunnyside, and I loved being a pastor. I feel like this was something that God had clearly called me to. And so it didn't make a lot of sense. It was very confusing, and on top of the disappointment, there's a lot of shame that still comes with illness. And when we talk about a mental illness, which is much more invisible than, say, if I had cancer or a physical disability, and so there was a need to find words to express that. And of course, so often in the church, I think we have words that refer to both spiritual conditions and physical or mental conditions, and this isn't helpful. And so when we talk about depression, sometimes people might add, pressure to the idea that maybe I just need to pray more, or if I would just do this thing, that God would heal me. This isn't something that God has given me an immediate healing for, even though I still have that hope. But we've had to come to know His sufficient grace, provided in strengths and perfected in weakness. And so what this like for me, it's been a journey of being humbled and trying to hold a posture of humility before God and before our church, and also to keep doing what is right, to honor the responsibilities in my life. Most importantly, my marriage with Monica, our family, providing for our children, and keeping my heart right with God.
And you touched on how it affected the family, and I want to bring Monica into the conversation of what was this like for the family?
Well, initially speaking for myself, it was, utterly terrifying. I mean, it wasn't the first time that Josh had gone through a struggle, or I would call it crisis in his mental health, but it was probably the most dramatic because it came on very quickly because of his change of medication. And so, I had to watch my very loving, friendly, outgoing husband begin to isolate, not only from our community and our friends, but from me. And he started walking around with his hood up and always feeling cold, and his body hurt. And it wasn't just his mood, it was just like all of him changed. And so it was scary, and it was, I constantly worried if he was going to hurt himself or if he had a plan. And it's terrifying to have to ask the person you love the most in the world, if they have plans to hurt themselves, or and also feeling powerless. We had 4 young children, and I felt like I had to keep everything together for them, and yet also support Joshua, and just in the midst of a pandemic and living away from family, it felt very scary. It felt isolating, and it was honestly very hard to hold on to hope a lot of the time. And also there was the constant fear of, as a pastor, is he going to lose his job? And so that was also a very scary part of it for me, which made church life uncomfortable. Also, I didn't know how to answer people's questions when they wanted to know, like, how he was doing. Church felt really uncomfortable to me. And there was a lot of times that I was perfectly okay with hiding over Zoom instead of attending on a Sunday morning. It kind of felt like I had my feet knocked out from under me, and all of a sudden I had to crab walk through life carrying all of my family and Josh's struggle and the concerns for our church community on top of me. And so, it was a very, very scary year for me. And Janae, you really have journeyed with us through this past whole year as a friend and as a church member, and just also want to hear about your experience with this past year, and maybe some insight from how the church was also experiencing it.
It was clear in even your description of where we were as a church, even positioned in this in-between pandemic. We're in Zoom, who's still in church, who's, just not able to make it in Zoom. And so I think there was that initial beginning time, the church was unaware of how affected your family was with this crisis. I had the unique position of having my husband part of the elder team, and so we became privy pretty quickly to what was going on with your family. So separating church versus friend is maybe a little difficult to figure out what fell where, but I think it is a testament to Sunnyside of how relational our church is. That those two overlap in our story. I don't think that's unique to only us,
Right.
With Sunnyside. And so it became very apparent quickly of how do we support the Jefferson family while caring for the church community. I feel like that was the dance that happened, both practically in leadership and then relationally between the families of where can we give, where can we support, where do we need to find other support. I think those were the big questions and the barriers and buffers that helped and carried everybody through those pieces to figure out. And so that's the overarching kind of story. And I thank you for sharing vulnerably of what happened individually as a family and bringing light to our community as church through this struggle. And I invite you back as we continue this conversation of what this meant through the struggle of mental illness.